Hey, what's up, folks? Welcome back to On Texas Football and welcome back to Sunday School. I'm lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. I'm your host of Sunday School. This edition of the program is brought to you by good friends over at Von Lane, vonlane.com. Use that code OTF25. You'll get $20 off your first ride with Von Lane. But before we get into the message from our good friends over at Von Lane, let's talk about what we'll be diving into today on Sunday School. We'll talk about one of my favorite football concepts. I think it's a cheat code at every level that I've seen. Empty formation. I love empty formation. Anybody who's heard me talk football for the last, 10, 15 years covering Texas football, you've probably heard me talk about empty formation a ton, and we'll get into it and why it can be potentially lethal with Arch Manning at the helm. Well, we'll dive into that here coming up on the program. But first, let's do a little history lesson, talk about why I'm obsessed with empty formation, how it came about. So essentially, it came about in the Super Bowl. I believe it was Super Bowl 53, if I'm not mistaken. That was the Rams versus the Patriots in that Super Bowl. And a lot of people hated this Super Bowl. A lot of you out there remember this as being one of the worst Super Bowls ever. They complained about it and how bad it was. I actually liked that Super Bowl. It was a defensive struggle. And people complained about how bad it was only because it was all about defense. If it was a shootout, people would have been talking about how great of a game it was. I'm a defensive guy, so I didn't mind the defensive chess match going on between Wade Phillips at the time and Bill Belichick. Thought it was great. But getting back to it, though, there was one touchdown scored in that game. Right? It was at the time. It set the record. Hell, still might be the case. Fewest points by both teams, fewest points by the winning team, fewest combined points through three quarters, most consecutive drives ended with a punt, and the longest punt. I mean, it was a defensive struggle. It was a slugfest. And there was one touchdown scored in the game, and it was in the last minutes of the game, a game-winning touchdown by the New England Patriots. And I remember watching the post game and them talking about the players for the Rams, talking about how they just weren't prepared for that last drive. The schematic advantage or schematic kind of curveball that the Patriots threw at the Rams, because the Rams were buttoned up. I mean, the Patriots couldn't score until that last drive of the game. And what happened was the Patriots got in 22 personnel. For those who know what 22 personnel is, the first number, we talking about 22 or 12 or 11. All right. The first number is the number of running backs. The second number is the number of tight ends. So 11, one running back, one tight end. 21, two running backs, one tight end. You get it. So they were in 22 personnel, which is two running backs and two tight ends. And usually when a team is in heavy personnel, two running backs on the field, two tight ends on the field, they're going to run the football, or at least that's the assumption. So the defense puts out what they call 40 personnel, which is 3 or 4 linebackers on the field, which means basically at 40 personnel, you only got 4 DBs on the field. Right? You're not in your sub package with 5 DBs on the field or 6 DBs on the field, dime and nickel packages. So the Rams countered with 40 personnel. And the New England Patriots did something that was so unorthodox. It had only been done 11 times, 11 instances the entire year, where a team lined up in 22 personnel and went empty. And it only happened 11 times the entire NFL season. How the hell could you be prepared for it? It was barely on film anywhere. Nobody could have been prepared for it. That's what they did. And because then they found the matchups that they wanted, right? They found the matchup with Edelman that they wanted on the outside. They found the matchup they wanted with Gronk, and that's pretty much how they end up winning that game. They finally got the Rams at a disadvantage or in a mismatch. And then after that, they were able to, work their way down the field and finally score a touchdown. And like I said, it only happened 11 plays out of all the hundreds, thousands of plays in the NFL. It only happened 11 times. So the Rams, Wade Phillips, there's nothing you can do about it. It was so unorthodox, in fact, that the Patriots players said after the game that they didn't even practice it. One of the players, Dwayne Allen, he was a tight end. He told Peter King at the time, it was pretty amazing. Hats off to the Rams. They really knew us. They played us great, but football's about in-game adjustments. Josh told us on the sideline, we did not practice this at all coming into this game, and I realized that, but this is going off in my head, and it's something I think we need to do. They did it and won the Super Bowl. Also, I always talk about breaking tendency. To win big games, you got to break tendency. To win the biggest game, you better break tendency because your opponent knows you really well. Anyway, that started my obsession with empty formation. I was like, oh man, that's pretty good. And then this is how you know football theory is all about, studying the game to an extent, being the student of the game and studying it to an extent where you can predict where the game is going. And I remember after watching it, I said, man, if NFL teams don't start going more empties, they're crazy. I'm like, it works. And doing it for them, heavier personnel, however you want to do it. And I'm calling myself Black Stradamus, but the Rams, Sean McVay, one of the brightest minds in football, he did just that. When the Rams went back to the Super Bowl 56, they came back to the Super Bowl as the team running more empty formation than anybody else in the league. Matter of fact, that Super Bowl between the Rams and the Bengals, it was the matchup between the two top teams in empty usage in the NFL. Joe Burrow and the Bengals were number 2. Rams were number 1. They both figured it out. They had learned. At least the Rams had learned firsthand. They got beat by it. And they were like, no, we're going to take this cheat code. All right. Can't beat them. You join them. We're taking that cheat code and we using that cheat code. And they did. And it helped them win the Super Bowl. That concept was one of the advantages they had over the rest of the league because they made it a staple in their offense. And so ever since then, I've been obsessed with it. And then I started doing my own research about empty formation, like where did it come from, the genesis of it. Strangely enough, and I'll get to Texas here. Strangely enough, it took me to Jerry Rice, actually. Some of you listening may know this and may be old enough to remember it. The Satellite Express. The Satellite Express was the nickname given to the offensive philosophy of Archie Cooley. He was the head coach of Mississippi Valley State. He's the one they recruited. They got Jerry Rice, right? To become one of the most prolific wide receivers in college football history in this system. They call it the Satellite Express. The system was so unique. Even in fact, you haven't seen anything like it since, other than in empty formations. But they ran 5 wide receivers. I'm not making this up. It was they ran a 5 wide empty set as their main. That was their main offense. 5 wide empty set, and went no huddle. And they would put Jerry Rice on one side all by himself, and they put 4 receivers on the other side, and they would force you to make a decision. You're going to leave Jerry Rice one-on-one with whoever the hell is out there because it don't matter who it is. Jerry Rice going to eat their lunch. Or, all right, are you going to devote numbers to these numbers we got? We got 4 eligible receivers over here, all right? And sometimes in a bunch, sometimes, they're spread out. But we got 4 of them over here, so you better make sure you got numbers because we got 4. So you better have 5 to match our 4. Unless you go 4-on-4 and leave it 1-on-1 with 0 coverage, and then that's a bit of a compromising position for a DB in 0 coverage. So for those who don't know, empty is when you have nobody in the backfield except the quarterback. Every eligible receiver is spread out, ready to go downfield and run a route. And that was their base offense at the time. And it was so prolific, in fact. Willie the Satellite Totten, he was a quarterback. That's why they called it the Satellite Express. It was his nickname. But they set more than 50 Division I AA passing records. And Jerry Rice set many Division I AA receiving records on his own. They averaged more than 57 points a game in 1984. Willie Totten threw 58 touchdowns in 1984. 58. Yeah, Archie Cooley used to wear like a cowboy hat on the sidelines. Wild times. They got on TV running this offense. Like, it was a big deal back in the day because nobody was doing it. You had to get eyes on it. And word on the street was that it actually inspired Bill Walsh a little bit. Like, hey, you know what? Could use some of that. Now, I don't think he went to the extreme of empty the way they did, but it did teach him a way to how to utilize and weaponize Jerry Rice, who went on to become the greatest wide receiver in all of football. So there's a West Coast connection to this thing. Let's get to Texas. All right. So I went down a rabbit hole, and that's the history of it. So for Texas, I've been tracking it ever since. Been obsessed with it, been tracking it ever since. And one thing that I found is that the explosive play rate is really why I think empty formation can be so useful and so lethal. And I'll get to the explosive play rate because I've been tracking it since about 2020. I started tracking it with Sam Ehlinger. Bam Bam Sam was great at empty formation. Fantastic out of it. And I've gone on the record. I've actually put it out there via Twitter. And I said it after, actually, it might have been after watching Jalen Hurts and the Eagles, because the Eagles were doing this a lot too. That the most stressful and the most possible amount of strain you can put on a defense, in my opinion, to have them defend the concept and the formation is empty formation with a dual threat quarterback. There's nothing, just empty formation already stresses you as a defense. You got to decide how you want to defend it, right? You're going to blitz empty, try to get the ball out of their hands quickly, or you're going to try to play and win the numbers advantage with 5 guys out on routes. And that's tough, especially when you got some elite personnel at those positions that can win one-on-one matchups really easily. And then this is all about the quarterback, because the empty formation pretty much, it helps define the look, right? Because you can't afford to disguise when you're going up against empty formation. You don't have time, and really you can't afford to be out of position because they got 5 wide receivers going out on routes. So you'll see teams abandon disguise against empty formation because it's such an extreme thing. They got to get to their alignment and assignment right away. And a lot of times teams either decide, all right, we know what, we're going to blitz it, play, go 0 or play 1 and get to the quarterback before he can even think about getting the ball out of his hands, or he can think about getting to a progression. Or teams will decide to win the numbers. We're only going to rush 3. We're going to drop 8. We're going to have a defender over the top. We're going to have a whole defender as well. And we may decide, we're going to bracket one of the receivers inside, right? Whatever it may be. But then it's on the quarterback to just find that there's going to be a one-on-one matchup in that case. There will be. And if they want to play zone and zone it up, well, for really savvy quarterbacks, zone makes their life a whole lot easier, especially when you can't disguise. Because teams don't really disguise a lot against empty. It's just too much of a risk to be floating around trying to deceive the quarterback and ends up out of position, empty. Boom, I throw it to him right now. Boom, he's gone. Or he can make a big play. And I think sometimes that's why the explosive play rate is so high. So I've been tracking this for a while. And like I said, Sam Ehlinger was great because he was a dual threat quarterback out of empty. And here's some of Sam's numbers. This is last year in 2020. Texas ran about a little over 7.5% of their plays were out of empty that year. They averaged over 9.5 yards per play. He had 5 rushes out of it. And I included the sack and a tackle for loss because that's college. But then he had a 9-yard touchdown run, an 18-yard touchdown run, and a 10-yard run. He averaged 10 yards per attempt out of it, only 55% completion percentage, but you'll deal with that because the 10 yards per attempt was really good. And your explosive play rate, which I love, your explosive play rate was your explosive pass rate. Explosive pass rate, all right, was over 20%. I'm talking about explosive pat when you threw the football, how often it would result in explosive play. And for this exercise, explosive play was 15 plus yards. My old notes, for some reason I was tracking it. It was 15 plus yards as an explosive play. So you're at 21%. That's really good. So then I thought, okay, let's see. And when Sark comes in, will it still translate? Because will Sark run empty? I didn't know how much he was going to run. And I was worried about that. And I think when Sark came in his first year, he was around 6%. All right. So that's a healthy amount of empty usage, unless you consider it to be one of your main cheat codes. And that year in 2021, you got Hudson Card, you got Casey Thompson as your QBs. Your completion percentage, around 61%, but still it averaged over 10 yards per attempt. and your explosive pass rate was still 21%. Your explosive pass rate was still really high. It's the explosive passes you're getting out of it. And if you go look at, and then I started looking, it's like, man, it's still tracking year to year, which is why I liked it. But you also still had some mobility, right? Because Hudson Card could run a little bit. There was some plays Hudson Card made actually in the run game out of empty formation. Casey Thompson can move a little bit. All right, he actually could move around. Obviously, more functional mobility than maybe Quinn, especially out of that set. And remember, we always talked about this. Casey would abandon the pocket quicker because he learned, I think, from Sam Ehlinger. Get the hell out of Dodge and abandon that pocket, especially in 2021 when Texas hadn't built up their offensive line with those big humans. Remember, Hudson Card would stay in the pocket trying to get through the progressions. Casey would get through one or two and be like, I'm gone. I'm about to go make a play. And I think he learned that from Sam, because Sam Ehlinger oftentimes would get out of Dodge. He was not going to stay in the pocket very long and allow it to collapse on him. He would end up going to make a play with his legs as a scrambler. And I think Casey learned some of that. Hudson Card learned it a little bit later on, I think. But then we go to 2022. You got a new starter in the mix with Quinn Ewers. I want to see if the numbers still tracked. And this is why I say for Quinn, he wasn't as effective in empty. He was still good. It was a cheat code for Texas, but he wasn't as dangerous out of it as some of those quarterbacks performed that didn't have the arm that he had, obviously the arm talent, but just could present the defense with a conundrum of the +1 in the running game, a guy that could run out of empty. Like I said, the most strain you could possibly put on the defense. So in 2022, you had a completion percentage about 62%, but your yards per attempt, less than 7 yards per attempt, right? You went from 10 yards per attempt in back-to-back years out of empty, different coaches, different quarterbacks, to less than 7 yards per attempt. And he was actually rushing out of it sometimes too and making some plays when he rushed out of it. I think that was Hudson Card, actually. I'm tracking empty, not just to Quinn, but most of that sample size obviously would have been Quinn. And he averaged, but your explosive play rate still was around 21%. Still healthy explosive play rate out of there. Even though I think you didn't run it as much, but still healthy amount of explosive plays out of it. Even though I say Quinn wasn't necessarily comfortable in it, because one thing I have been tracked, because most people will probably they're asking me this question when I talk about empty, or you're probably asking it right now, right, in the comments, or you're asking it to yourself, what about pass protection out of empty? Because your tight end usually helps if they're in line, or the running back. All of my data that I've studied has indicated that sack rates drop out of empty. Joe Brady did a similar study at LSU as the OC there in 2019 and said the same thing, coming from the Saints, I believe it was. He came from before he went to LSU, that actually when you send out 5 receivers out on routes, that their sack rates drop because the ball comes out quickly. It speeds up the clock of the quarterback. He knows the ball. You ain't got nobody behind you. You can't, ain't no protection. You ain't setting much protection. It's not a just thing. You know, hey, if they got more guys, all right, they're sending more guys than I have to block with these 5, the ball's got to come out. And the ball still got to come out quickly out of empty formation most of the time. You are starting to get some longer developing routes out of empty in the NFL. But I think for the most part, it enhances and facilitates the quick game, because you're supposed to be able to, once the defense abandons their disguise, which they will, because you'll stress them with that formation, then you can start picking out the favorable matchups for the quarterback. So I think so it cleans up the pre-snap read a lot of time for the quarterback. All right, so getting back to it. So in 2023, Quinn got a little bit better. Still, yards per attempt increases at 7.8 yards per attempt out of empty in 2023. And I say Quinn because it's most of the sample size, even though we know he didn't start and finish every game. But your explosive play rate, 19%. So it's still relatively high, your explosive play rate. He did take 6 sacks out of it. And that's why I said Quinn wasn't totally comfortable in empty, because you're not supposed to take that many sacks out of it. Every year I've tracked it, 20, 21, 22, and 23, 24, usually, like I said, sack rates drop. And in 23 was one of the first times the sack rate did not drop out of empty. And it's because Quinn was a little uncomfortable in terms of his pocket presence in empty formation. He did get better, though, toward the end of the year. The last 3 games of that 23 season. This was Tech, Oklahoma State, and Washington. He had a 76% completion percentage out of empty, averaging over 12 yards per attempt. He did take 2 sacks, but he was averaging, if you go look at the explosive play rate, they were at 30% explosive play rate last 3 games of 2023. And I thought to myself, I wonder if he's trending toward, at least 2024, Texas will be trending toward, being a lot more prolific in empty formation. Or at least Quinn will be much improved as a third-year starting quarterback. And I think he was. The yards per attempt went over 8. Still didn't get back to the 10 yards per attempt you were in 2021, but he's over 8 yards per attempt, 75% completion percentage. If you go look at the explosive play rate, if you're looking at 20-plus yard gains, you're right at 16%. If you're looking at 15-plus yard gains at empty formation, you were over 20%. You were actually approaching 22%. So your explosive play rate, it is consistent. It's sticky, as they say. Sticky means the stat that it no matter what the situation or circumstance, that it still ends up translating. Different quarterbacks, different seasons, different personnel, different level of play, whatever. It's sticky. And the explosive play rate out of empty, it's sticky. If you go look at Texas' explosive play rate overall, Texas is hovering around maybe 10% overall, which is really good, by the way. It's one of the highest. They led the country in explosive plays, right? 20-plus yard plays. If you're just looking at that number overall for the offense, Texas is hovering a little bit below 10%. But when you're in empty formation, you get to double that. Come on, 20% explosive play rate. And then so I started thinking, okay, so Quinn got better in it, but he wasn't naturally elite and naturally comfortable in empty formation. And I think some quarterbacks, I think they just naturally have a better presence in empty formation, and it speeds up their clock, and that doesn't have a debilitating effect on them. And I think at times it would with Quinn. Like I said, he got a lot better last 3 games of 2023 and 2024, his best year in empty formation for Texas. So how's Arch going to be in empty formation? Remember, I talked about this earlier. The closest thing that I got, and I went and looked at all of Arch's snaps out of empty formation. Went back and looked at them. And the reason I figured, even before, my hypothesis was before the rabbit holing and watching the film, was that Arch was going to be really good out of empty formation because he naturally gets through progressions quicker, and he gets deeper into progressions a lot quicker than Quinn would. He has the dual threat ability, like I said, that would put the maximum amount of stress on the defense. And remember, a couple of Sunday schools ago, we discussed Arch in butt-naked situations. And I ain't talking about bootlegs. I'm talking about 3rd and long, 3rd and 7+ yards to gain. When everybody and their mama, everybody in the stadium knows you're throwing the football. That you have to strip the offense bare. That's why I call it a butt-naked situation. They strip it bare. All right. No play action pass, usually no RPOs, no screens. That's 65% of Sark's offense. You take that out of the equation on 3rd and long. Everybody knows you're throwing finally the situation that flips, the odds finally flip in favor of the defense. And that's when they get exotic. And that's when they bring their elaborate pressure packages. Right? That's when you see more man coverage. That's when you see more inverted Tampa situations from teams where they're trying to confuse you. So it's, to me, I would say that's arguably the toughest task for an offense is 3rd and long to execute that when you are at a disadvantage. So I looked at Arch in those 3rd and long situations. He had over an 80% completion percentage on 3rd and long situations. Now, that's not conversion. That's just completion percentage, though. But he converted over 50% of his 3rd and long situations in those 2 starts I looked at. It's the 2 starts. I didn't want to look at the UTSA game where he was throwing the mix. I didn't want to look at when he got some mop-up time. Look at this 2 starts. All right, Mississippi State and ULM. And when he was in a 3rd and long situation, he converted over 50% of them. Guys, 3rd and long conversion rate is usually at best 25%. Like at best. I think that's just the really good offenses. At best 25%. This dude was at 50%. I consider the competition, but still, that to be that good in those, like I said, butt naked situations where everybody knows you're throwing the football, and it's more than likely that you got at least 4 receivers going out on routes, maybe even 5, not necessarily from an empty set, but out of the backfield, whatever it may be. And he was great there. Like I said, 88% completion percentage. And by the way, he had a drop. In one of the situations, there was a drop. He would have been perfect. 18 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, and explosive play rate of 33%. In butt naked situations, 3rd and long, no screens, no play action pass, no RPO. So he was really good in those situations. So I thought to myself, okay, let's see how he is in empty. So I went and looked at it, went and broke it down. So Arch out of empty, and it wasn't a ton of empty sets. I believe total here, if you take away the penalties, there were 8 plays I have here. 71% completion percentage, which is really good. He did have a 21-yard run against Georgia, so that did kind of inflate the numbers a bit. So if you're looking at yards per play, he's at 12 yards per play out of empty formation because of that explosive run that he had versus Georgia that was at 21-yarder. And if you go look at the explosive play rate overall, 25% for him. 25% explosive play rate, just overall, on the ground and through the air. And over 10 yards per attempt throwing the football. 10.7 actually. So first down touchdown rate, you're at 25% first down touchdown rate. That probably can improve, probably will improve when he's the starter running a lot of empty formation. But based on the numbers, he's going to be really good out of empty. I think you'll see the best Texas has been out of empty formation since Sam Ehlinger, since veteran Sam. I'm talking about 2020 Sam, who had been, 3-year starter multi-year starter for Texas. You're going to see Arch have that capability his first year as a full-time starter out of empty formation. And I think he'll get even better as the season goes on because he'll be a running threat. And I think Sark should increase the empty usage rate. I think for Texas, empty usage is probably last year. I think you were at 2023. You were at 5.9%. Talking about overall plays, 5.2, 5.9%. Seems like that is the range for Sark of your overall plays. It was at 5.6% this year. 11% of your overall pass plays. I would increase it this year with Arch. I think you've probably been hovering between 10 to 12%. Will be my guess. I haven't go look at my notes for 2021, 22. But I would guess you'll be somewhere around there, 10 to 12%. If I'm Sark, I think it should be hovering around 15% for Arch. I think he'll be that good out of empty formation. It's definitely a cheat code, as we've established, right? At the highest levels, even in the NFL. I mean, go look at the Super Bowl champion Eagles. They run empty formation, and Jalen Hurts will run downhill on you out of empty formation. And you better have a spy on him. That's the beautiful thing about a dual threat quarterback out of empty. Better have a spy. And then when you got a spy on him, well, that changed the math, don't it? You was going to use that. You're going to win the numbers advantage versus empty. We got 5 receivers going on the routes. You want to rush 3, all right, or rush 4, drop 7. So you got a man for every man. And then you got 2 free defenders. One you might put in the deep post just in case, last line of defense. And then one you might lose your whole player, but that whole player now has got to be a spy. And so now you may decide, all right, we're only going to rush 3 and we're going to drop 8. So I can use 2 guys as a spy. And wherever the quarterback goes, one guy ends up being the spy. Other guy can take the hole. And then we'll keep a deep safety. It puts you in a conundrum as a defense. And as you can see, the numbers don't lie. Explosive play rate through multiple quarterbacks, multiple head coaches, different offenses. It don't matter. Empty works. It works. It's like the Sex Panther. 60% of the time, it works every time. Well, it's a little better than 60% of the time. It works, man. Trust me, I've been tracking it ever since. So that would be my suggestion. Actually, I think Sark's probably already ahead of us, that Arch Manning out of empty formation may be one of your more lethal combinations in all of college football this year. Period. All right, let's thank our friends. Let's thank our friends over at Von Lane before we end this session of Sunday School. Thank you very much to Von Lane for sponsoring Sunday School and their ongoing support of On Texas football. Like myself, I'm sure a lot of you out there have been trying to get to the major Texas cities, to Austin, to Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Fort Worth, and it can be a struggle. Let's be honest, right? It's a toss-up. Do you deal with the airport chaos and hope your flight isn't delayed, or do you brace yourself for hours behind the wheel, battling traffic and road rage and burning an entire day of productivity? Now there's a third option, and it's better in every way. You arrive at a luxury hotel terminal, no TSA lines, no long-term parking lots, just a seamless boarding experience that takes minutes, not hours. You settle into a plush leather seat. A hot towel, pillow, and blanket are at arm's reach. Your attendant offers complimentary snacks, beverages on select trips, even a full meal if you like. If you need to relax, you can lean back and enjoy the ride. But if you want to stay productive, there's high-speed Wi-Fi and power at every seat. So while you're unplugging or powering through, the Von Lane team, they are monitoring traffic in real time and using smarter routes and efficient detours to keep your trip smooth and on schedule. And right now is the perfect time for you to plan your fall travel. Booking is open through September, so whether you're headed to a college football game, like a lot of you will be, or a weekend getaway, or a business trip that needs to be done right, Von Lane makes the journey part of the reward. That's Von Lane. It serves Austin, Dallas, Houston, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and in the Southeast, Atlanta, Nashville, and Memphis as well. Visit vonlane.com, VONLANE.com. Use the code OTF25, that's OTF25, to save $20 off your first ride with Von Lane. That's Von Lane, Elevated Regional Bus Transportation. Thank you very much to Von Lane for sponsoring this edition of Sunday School. All right, sorry guys, I went a little bit long there, but once I go down a rabbit hole, it's it's a little bit tough to shut me up. But I appreciate you guys taking the time to sit with me. We'll be back next week for another edition of Sunday School. Thank you to Matthew behind the scenes. He's the real MVP, of course. And thank you to Von Lane for sponsoring this edition of Sunday School. For Matthew and for Von Lane, I'm Lifetime Longhorn Rod Babies. Until next time, hook 'em horns.